Milt Jackson. I'm sitting here with Milt Jackson, and first of all, I would like to say it's a great honor to have an opportunity to interview you on behalf of the Howard University Jazz Oral History Project. When we approached you about doing a life history document, one of the things that you made a request for is that a portion of it be video. Would you care to share with us why you think that's an important dimension of this project?
Yeah. I think it's because there's not enough of us, while we're still alive, that give people the true insight on what we have done and how valuable and creative this music is and what it means to us in the American society, especially from the standpoint of blacks.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues that's come up in the course of the interview was the importance of media in setting taste, in shaping what is acceptable and what's desirable by the general population in terms of entertainment, art, music, culture, etc. How do you see doing a document like this fitting into that kind of a perspective, or what can be done to enhance the position of jazz in the media?
Well, the way I think it would enhance the music is, or the industries for that matter, is because they will get some authentic information, first of all, some real true information about what we do and what we have done in terms of the creativity of this art form. And I think that much more of it needs to be put on film and documented by recording or film, if not both, so that students who have never seen Duke Ellington still can learn about his music, for example, even though they're no longer here. You know, greats like Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Lester Young, Charlie Parker, etc. All of these musicians are dead and gone. Therefore, all you've got in terms of value is what they have left through recordings. And if any of them have done any of this kind of thing, that even makes it more valuable, of course.
One of the things that you mentioned Duke Ellington, and one of the things in the course of another important thing in the course of the interviews is, as a young man in Detroit coming up in the middle 30s, you were able to firsthand see the Lunsfords and the Ellingtons and the Basies and the Lester Youngs and these great musicians, person to person. What kind of an impact did it have upon you to see a Duke Ellington at the Greystone Ballroom in a Monday night session? Can you talk about what that was like and what that meant to you?
For me personally, it was a tremendous asset, because I was just so caught up in music and interested in music, actually going back to the time when I was 7, when I found out that that was what I was interested in more so than anything else. In other words, to further explain that, when I was 7 years old, I knew then what I was going to do for a livelihood, or what I was going to do when I became a man. I was going to be involved in music, you know. Now, at that time, I had no idea in what capacity, okay? But I did know, even then, that music would be my life's work.
Mm-hmm. But I think that you expressed a particular kind of impact that a man like Ellington had, his composure, the way he presented himself, the model that he established as a musician and as a man conducting himself in the world. That
what impressed me so strongly, he had all of the qualities I think that a person needs as an artist, okay? Let me just sort of expound on that theory from that standpoint. He was impeccable in terms of the way he dressed, okay? He was very, very articulate in the way that he talked, which is a very important thing. No question about the music. It's plainly evident that he was one of our great masters in terms of being a composer, a band leader, and also as a pianist. In other words, he was accomplished in all of these fields pertaining to music, and that made him, in my estimation, a genius. One man that had all of the qualities all wrapped up into one person, and this is a quality that I think that symbolizes what I think the Americans, well, especially Black Americans, should stand for.
It's a lot more difficult today for a young person in the community, a young aspiring musician, to have the kind of direct contact that you could have. There aren't the ballrooms, there aren't the nightclubs, there aren't the jam sessions. What do you see as what can be done to replace those as kind of means of transmitting the culture? Each one of those is a way of transmitting and linking future generations, coming up generations, which what other generations were doing, and a way of establishing continuity. We don't have those things now. What do you see as some things that could come online to replace that?
One of the things is exactly what we're doing here in doing this tape is, I think a lot of it, the emphasis is now pointed towards school and the classroom. Because of that same reason that you just mentioned, we no longer have jam sessions in most nightclubs. You don't have clubs where young musicians can go in and sit next to their peers and learn whatever it is they want to learn in terms of their craft from the peers and the innovators, because in most of today's music, that's been removed. Also by the fact that there are so many, like I said, so many innovators and creators of this particular phase of the music that are no longer here. I think it becomes vitally important that we use every means we have, in other words, in bringing this attention into the forefront as far as students, and especially students and kids who are involved in this kind of thing. In other words, want to get involved in things musically, or want to get involved in music itself. You know, in other words, we need every outlet that we have, and I feel this has, in the last 15 or 20 years, become a very important factor in getting that kind of thing done and getting across to the people.
Do you feel it's especially incumbent upon institutions in the Black community to take the leadership in that regard? And what kinds of things would you suggest that happen in that?
Yes, I do. Because I think, first of all, Black people should be interested in themselves in terms of their arts and cultures. In other words, whatever it is, I feel, even though I'm a musician, I have a duty to learn about one of the greatest Black artists we have. You know what I'm saying? In turn, we are supposed to learn these things about each other, which I don't think we do enough of. You know, because for students and kids who are going to school not to know about it, whether they're going into music or not, I think it's necessary for them to have that knowledge. I'll tell you where I get my opinion from. The fact of having traveled to many countries, European countries and all, and learning of their cultures and things. In most schools in Europe, for example, I don't know if it exists today. I know when I first went to Europe, it did exist. Every student, regardless of what they were going to become, had to take a year of musical education. They had to take a year of military education. You know, I see that as a valuable asset, because the things that you can get from that 1 year of training, I think, can become very valuable to you later on in life. In other words, whether you become a musician or go into the military forces or what have you, that's not important. The fact that it was required, it made you do research that you might not have ordinarily done in terms of learning about that. I think it has a lot to do with the culture and
the fiber of the culture,
the fiber
the quality
of a country, right?
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
Reinforcing that. Probably the thing that people, the phase of your career that people would first know about is your participation in the quote-unquote bebop revolution, along with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Kenny Clark and Bud Powell and Charlie Christian and Thelonious Monk and artists of that caliber. Would you share with us how you first met Dizzy Gillespie and how you got to New York, and perhaps take us up to that famous 1945 engagement at Billy Berg's? Okay,
I'll try to give you some of that. My first experience as far as seeing Dizzy was all the way back to 1939, when at the Fox Theater. The bands, it was very popular for bands to play dances and theaters in those days also.
We're talking about Detroit.
Right, in Detroit, where I was born, by the way. I first saw Dizzy in Cab Calloway's band, okay? A few years later, about 1942, I had the chance to meet Dizzy for the first time, appearing with Earl Hines' band. And Charlie Parker was also in that band, by the way, playing tenor, not alto. Yeah. And then again, I met Dizzy on another occasion in sometime in 44, I guess, the latter part of 1944, after he had appeared with Billy Eckstine's band. And when he left that band and toured as a single, which a lot of musicians did at that time and still do today, he came through Detroit and did a concert and came to a jam session where most of the good musicians around town would gather and have jam sessions. Jam sessions were very big, as you mentioned, in those days with musicians. He came to this nightclub and heard me play, and I guess he was impressed by what he heard. In fact, he is largely responsible for me leaving Detroit and moving to New York. And matter of fact, to sort of seal the enticement, he offered me a job. He said, if you ever do decide to come to New York, you know, I'll give you a job.
So that first job was at the Spotlight? Or did that come later?
No, that came later. Believe it or not, the first job was right here in Washington, D.C., at a place called the Brown Derby over on Connecticut Avenue.
And who was in that band?
Dizzy, myself, Ray Brown, Max Roach, and Charlie Rouse, who's also a Washingtonian, by the way.
And then you went, that was what, that band lasted, what, 2 weeks?
2 weeks. We had an engagement here for 2 weeks. We stayed in a nightclub 2 weeks. When we went back to New York, Dizzy again reorganized. In other words, that group disbanded. He organized another group, which he took to California. Okay? In that band, Charlie Parker was added to that group. Okay? For me, that was one of the most exciting things that I had ever had happen to me. Knowing that I was going to get an opportunity not only to just play with Bird or even jam with him, but to play with him every night for 8 weeks.
People talk about, you know, Charlie Parker Bird in an almost mythical sense, as if he were extra human, as if he had creative powers that were just so far above other musicians that it would be unfair to even compare other musicians to him. Do you feel that way?
Yes, I do. Well, especially in a musical sense. In a musical sense, Charlie Parker was such a perfectionist in terms of what he did and how he did it, that there's no one that even came close to him in terms of emulation. I always use an example. One of the closest, unfortunately, another gentleman that passed away, he lived down here also, Sonny Stitt, who I got to be very close friends with throughout the years. Well, he was from Saginaw anyway, and I was from Detroit, so, you know, we'd always meet those musicians that come to Detroit, because they would have to come to Detroit, actually, to find a job or actually to find work. Because if you lived in a town as small as Saginaw, then it's very difficult finding a job as a musician. And most of those musicians would always migrate to the larger cities. In this case, Detroit, where I came from. And this is how I got to meet Sonny and many more of the other great artists who became real great in their own right and artists in the business.
But you said that Stitt was the closest thing to Parker, but even he was not in Parker's league.
No. Well, not from the standpoint of being that close to him as a perfectionist, you know. I still admire him greatly as a musician, and he still was among the innovators as so many others. But again, going back to Charlie Parker just had a quality and a charisma which just stood out so far above the others. This is what made, I think, his influence rub off on all other great musicians. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about other musicians who were considered equally as great, such as Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Don Byers, Ben Webster, Dizzy Gillespie, Fats Navarro, Clifford Brown. I could go on and on. with a list that actually would never end of musicians who got to be great in their own right. But still, even these musicians looked up to Charlie Parker, I think, more so than any other musician that you looked up to.
At the time that you were making this music, and of course there was Dizzy's small group, and then you also participated in Dizzy's big bands, I guess through 1949 and even some into the 50s. How conscious were you that you were reshaping not only the face of jazz, but the face of 20th century music?
I was quite aware of it. In fact, I was very aware of it. Because I said, like most all musicians at that time were following in the footsteps. When I say that, I mean in terms of emulation and imitation. Followed in the footsteps of Charlie Parker and Dizzy. You know, like I said, after you leave, after you talk about people like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, nobody in the music industry, in my opinion, especially in jazz, had the impact, or as strong an impact as Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie had on the rest of the musical world in jazz.
How do you, and this may sound like a strange question to evaluate yourself, but how do you see yourself within that echelon of leadership in the reshaping of the music?
Well, I have been given the honorary title, I guess, in respect of being the bebop innovator or predecessor on that instrument, the vibroharp. In other words, being the first to change the instrument in terms of style and the approach of playing after Lionel Hampton. I guess I have been given that credit. And of course, I'm very grateful for that, because once you reach an echelon where you got mostly every musician aspiring to play the same instrument, they want to follow in your footsteps or tell you that my influence had a lot to do with their decision in terms of playing. Well, this is like a congressional medal or something of that level.
In the course of 40 years of playing, 47 years of playing and recording, you have logged up as probably, you rank in the top 5 or 10 of recorded artists in jazz. I understand that the Smithsonian is...
The last time I was informed about the research program, it was broken down to where there were 5 left. Now, out of that 5, they were trying, I guess they will eventually try and break it down to who actually is the most recorded artist. Okay, that's another echelon, because I've been fortunate enough to be in that group of 5, along with Ray Brown. He's the other. Now, the other 3, I have no idea who they are. You know, I could research around and eventually find out, because it's not that difficult to find out. Just a matter of finding out, because all records are recorded and copyrighted. Therefore, it's just a question of research to find out who has recorded the most in the business itself.
Of course, from 1952 on, really, a large portion of that recorded activity would be with the Modern Jazz Quartet, which is the next major aspect of your career that people are aware of.
Well, that is true, because with the exception of the few years which we disbanded, that group has been together for 32 years. That's also a record in terms of personnel, for example. After Connie Kay replaced Kenny Clark in the group, that personnel has remained the same throughout the years and has never changed. No other group in jazz has done that.
Would you give us the history of how the Modern Jazz Quartet, which was originally the Milt Jackson Quartet, and basically the rhythm section for the Dizzy Gillespie, how
it was formed?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very simple. At that time, what would have been the 4 original members of the quartet, we all performed in Dizzy's band at the same time. That is myself, John Lewis, Ray Brown, and Kenny Clark. One night, Dizzy suggested that we play together just as a quartet, give the rest of the band a chance to rest, because the rest of the band, you must remember, are involved in playing arrangements and things like this, would make it difficult. Therefore, there are periods when they need a rest, especially the trumpet players and the trombone players, the brass section, as we call it.
I guess you mentioned that Gil Fuller
did most of the writing for that part of it in the band, because he wrote exciting music. In other words, music that appealed to the brass section. You know, Tad Dameron, who was the other arranger, was like the chief arranger because he did both. He arranged all of the lyrical things and the melodic things, which were very, very beautiful, and he also could arrange the dynamic things as well. You know, so he was one of our greatest all-around gifted arrangers also. And this is what would happen in that band. And this had a very heavy influence and a very heavy impact on that band and the musicians in that band. I also mention that because for people who see Dizzy appearing today, for example, they have no idea or do not realize the ingenuity of that man, because having been a part of that band back in those days, to realize what he does, a lot of his ingenuity is not even displayed because of that. In other words, the man is an absolute genius in the caliber of a Duke Ellington in front of a big band, because he's so limited with a small group in terms of what he can do. He's absolutely incredible as a leader in the forefront with a big band.
So, in effect, this became a regular feature every night, the quartet.
This became a regular feature. Okay, and getting back to that, we had all agreed that once we left the band, we would again form this same group as a quartet. The reason for that is, in the band, it became a part of the band, by the way, that after that first night that we did it. In other words, it became a large part of the band's repertoire. There was a certain amount of time allotted out for each concert or dance where the four of us just played. And this is how it came back. Okay, we were so impressed with it ourselves, we had decided to form this same group later on. But what happened was the two things that happened that prevented that happening right away. First of all, John had decided to go to school and get his master's from Manhattan School of Music, right? In the meantime, Ray had left Dizzy's band and married Ella Fitzgerald, and was also performing with her as a trio, he and Hank Jones, and a drummer named Charlie Smith. At the time, we decided to form the group itself as a working unit. We could not afford to hire Ray because Ray was making too much money with Ella for us to pay him that kind of money. So therefore, we had to change the plan there. Therefore, we decided on Percy Heath at that point, who we felt was also a very great bassist. And we got him, and that's how the original quartet was formed. Okay? Kenny Clark stayed with us for approximately a year and a half. Then he decided to leave and go to Europe. And we replaced him with Connie Kay, and the group has remained the same with that personnel to this day.
Now, the MJQ has had a unique and has had a continuing unique impact on jazz, on American music, on a couple of levels. On the presentational level, the kind of venues that you played, concert halls, museums, festivals, the context that you would play in with symphonies, with strings, with soloists of the caliber of Sonny Rollins, for example, at the Music Inn, that kind of thing. In terms of the kind of composure or demeanor that you brought to a presentation, and then also in a purely musical way in the use, and I guess this was John Lewis's influence, the use of certain classical forms and counterpoint, and those kinds of devices within a jazz context.
John does get the credit for that because he has a very extensive classical background. I emphasize that because in those days, most of us as black musicians did not have a classical background. I was fortunate in the fact that during my high school days, I had a certain amount of classical background. Okay, but most jazz musicians, especially black musicians, do not have a classical background. Okay, another reason for this is that we all jointly felt that a lot of the dignity that goes along with the music itself, which I had seen through bands like Duke Ellington and Jimmy Lunceford, had eventually gotten lost in the fact that, let's take Dress, for example. One of the things that impressed me about those bands was that I was excited by the fact that they dressed so well as playing. You know, this was a large part of it too, to be dressed on stage and really look like gentlemen. And this had a lot to do with enhancing the music itself. Okay, I feel that somewhere along the way we eventually lost that respect of the music, you know, and the way we dress. I tell you why. A first impression is a philosophy. You know, a first impression is a lasting one. Okay, that means the way you look to me when I first see you, as well as the way you sound when I hear you. To me, it's just as important. Okay, in the formation of the quartet, we felt that if we did that, brought this back, wearing tuxedos and always dressed, would bring a lot of the dignity back to the music, which I feel had been removed. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the reason for that. Also, the classical approach. Now, one of the reasons for the classical approach is that widens the scope as a jazz musician, and this removes a lot of limits and restrictions that you would have. For example, this is something else I don't think any other jazz group has done. I'm not sure. That's why I say, to cover myself, it's not authentic. But we have recorded with 36 different symphonies. Now stop and think about that. 36 different symphonies, including recording with the Stuttgart Symphony, who's considered one of the greatest symphony orchestras in the world, not just in Europe, in the entire world. Okay? We recorded with that symphony. We've recorded with the Bozak String Quartet, the Chicago String Quartet, these kind of things that we perform. You know, we perform in many aspects. We perform with the New York American Orchestra. Many symphonies I could name. You know, the Chicago Symphony, Detroit Symphony, Cleveland Symphony, the Boston Pops. We've done all of that. And this is a very strong major asset as a musician in having all of these different directions which you can go. You know, that gives you a very wide scope with which to deal.
Mm-hmm. As much a part of the repertoire of the MJQ as, I want you to reflect on John Lewis as a composer, not only just using classical devices, but as a lyrical, melodic composer, and what you found inspiring within that. And then also talk about your contribution to the MJQ's repertoire, which was not insignificant in terms of pieces that you contributed.
Okay. I've always had a great admiration and respect for John. He's also one, having gotten his master's, made him a well-rounded musician, one who is not only one of the pioneers and a great jazz pianist, but he also is a very, very marvelous composer and arranger. You know, he's got all of those qualities that connect up that make you a very gifted musician. I always respect that. Now, I learned a lot through him from the technical aspects. You know, I give him a large amount of the credit, and for me being able to finally read music, which I didn't really do in high school. I only read certain parts. I'll tell you the reason for that. Going back to my high school days, that perfect pitch which we discussed on recording, in a way, in most cases, it's an asset. In some ways, it can be a drawback. Let me explain one of the few drawbacks in my own case. Having had that natural gift of perfect pitch and a photographic memory, I could listen to the music and memorize it before most of the students could read it. Therefore, I already had it learned in my head, and I said, well, why go to the trouble of learning it and taxing your brain with learning it by reading it from the paper when I already have it in my head? At that time, it's like being aggressive or being arrogant and cocky, which I learned, which was a mistake, because later on, I still had to go back into theory and harmony to learn how to be a composer in terms of writing music down and arranging it and all this kind of thing. Had I done that in high school at the time when I had those facilities at my disposal while I was still sharp as far as the mind is concerned, I could have done it much easier, you see? But having waited until later on to get back to that, then, as you know, the older you get, the slower you get, then the slower the mind works. So it was a little more difficult in getting back to it. Had I done it at that time, it would have been far easier for me to do.
Let's talk about some of the other arrangers, composers that you particularly admire and that you have worked with. For example, Tad Dameron, when you did the Big Bags album.
I think after Tad Dameron's era, one of the arrangers I think it had the most impact and influence on me was Quincy. After he left Lionel Hampton's band and came to New York to do a lot of work in studios, he became like the or a staff member, say, for a company like, where he eventually wound up being vice president for a record company like Mercury. Yeah. Okay? In other words, he's the principal arranger. He's the one lay out the arrangements. Even if somebody else writes it, he's still the one that lays it out for people like Dinah Washington or to back up anybody. For example, he wrote the arrangements on my first string album, which I did, which is still one of my favorites, by the way. The Ballad Artistry of Milt Jackson. He did all of the arrangements except for 3, which another great arranger I'm going to mention, Jimmy Jones. He did 3 of the arrangements. Quincy did all the rest. Now getting around to Jimmy Jones, he's another one that's gifted. Okay, let me explain his credentials. He was so gifted, he was the only man that Duke Ellington would call to replace him to arrange or to conduct when he was unable to do it himself. Okay? I say that to say that's a criteria. When I got so much respect for another man, I say he's the only one I'll call in to substitute for me or to do something for me where I'm unable to do it myself. When Duke wrote the suites he wrote, the musicals, like Black, Brown, and Beige, for example. What else? My People. These were all turned into musicals, as you know, may or may not know. Okay, Jimmy Jones played a principal part in doing that because when he took it and moved it and would have this musical going in more than one city, he had to have somebody else, okay? Jimmy Jones was the man that he called upon to conduct and take charge of the other production, right? Yeah. So these are just a few of the arrangers, I guess the ones that I respect and admire most.
In your work that paralleled your work with the MJQ, you recorded quite often with big bands. The Melba Liston sessions, the Quincy Jones things with the Tad Dameron did for you. Right. Would you like to be doing today big band situations?
Oh yeah, I still do. Because I've always been instrumental in doing that. This was always a very important necessity for me as a musician. I needed all this outlet. Like I said, music to me became a challenge. And once you take up that challenge, then there are many avenues and areas which you can explore, okay? In the confines of the quartet, I felt I had to have an outlet where I could go and do other things, which I always did, which included working with big bands, with other orchestras. Okay, for example, one of my next albums will be another string album. Okay, that's a project. Another future project is, I just recorded an album last year with J.J. Johnson, who is another innovator who I greatly admire and respect. Also, he's another one. Not only as a gifted player, he's also one hell of an arranger and composer. Okay? I like playing with him so much that I'm going to do another album with him in next year.
Getting back to the MJQ for a second. After the, I guess, 22 years of straight activity that you had, you decided to break up. How did that come about? Why did that come about?
Oh, okay. I am responsible for that also. In other words, I am the one that takes the weight. What happened was I was rather bitter at the time and very disappointed in the financial outcome of the quartet for what I felt we represented to the world musically. I felt that what we represented to the world music from a musical standpoint, we never got enough financial rewards, or if we did, we got ripped off for it. And I, at that point, had become so bitter about it, I just decided to leave and to just go on my own.
Is that when you began your relationship with Pablo Records? Or had
right, right. Right after that, I began my permanent association, that is, with Norman Granz and Pablo Records.
The quartet is back, and not as an occasional enterprise. But
no, it's back together. However, one difference in the format of the group as opposed to before, we do not perform as much as we did. In other words, the first 22 years of existence, we would perform as much as 10 months out of the year. Okay, in the new format, that's one of the things that we've eliminated, the fact that we will not perform that much during the year, under no circumstances. This was one of the agreements made in reforming the group again.
What are your future projects with the group? I understand that you're going to focus almost exclusively in 1985 on concerts with symphonies, or at least concert hall type presentations.
Right. We have just joined a new agency, and the emphasis with this new agency in the future, especially for 85, will be on doing mostly solo concerts, very few nightclubs, if any, and a lot of emphasis on doing more concerts with symphonies or with string quartets and what have you. Because I feel this shows off the asset or the versatility of the quartet best, as opposed to just doing a concert alone or working in a nightclub. And this is where the emphasis is going to be placed in our future endeavors.
Are you and Mr. Lewis preparing new music for this, or will you be playing?
We're in the process now of preparing new music, well, to make another album, which we're going to get together, I think, in the early part of next year. That is also, yeah, one of the first major projects that we're going to undertake.
I was referring to some new music that might be used in a symphonic situation.
Well, yes, new music also. Well, John is always writing. So then, in other words, I say that to say there's always new music. You know, he always got new material coming that he either has already written or is writing. Therefore, we always got something fresh that's coming from the quartet. And we're going to use some of that music. I'm going to get busy and do some writing for it, for the next upcoming album that we will do.
You know, a couple of piano players, very different. Both, when you play with both of whom I've enjoyed a great deal, and that's the mid-50s recordings that you made with Thelonious Monk. I guess some of which came on 2 albums under his name, and then some of which was issued under your name. And then Oscar Peterson, 2 very different pianists. One quite idiosyncratic, you know, nobody can imitate him,
right.
And one a virtual textbook in terms of proficiency at the keyboard. Yet you were able to adapt to both, play well with both. Not many musicians can do that. How do you approach that?
This goes back to that part I told you about the musical challenge. You know, as I forestated, music, once I decided to really get into it, it became a challenge to me, okay? In that challenge, I decided to remove all limits or as many restrictions as I possibly could. And this is the best way of eliminating that. In other words, to feel so confident that you can play in the context of any group or any band in any surrounding. And this is what you're saying. And I found, okay, a lot of the importance of that is placed on that natural ability I have also, you know, that perfect pitch and being able to memorize things like that. This definitely helps me to fit myself into whatever surrounding it is and perform with that group or band, whatever it is, and get it across. Because in other words, I lean towards that. I strive toward that kind of thing. Okay, here's Monk. Like he said, he has one method of playing. I said, now listen to what he's doing, okay? Then I get my ideas together and fit my ideas with what he's doing. Okay, the same thing with Oscar. I turn around and do the same thing with Oscar. Let me tell you something about that, make it unique. 2 years ago, he and I did a duet concert, just the 2 of us, which is unusual in the sense of jazz to me to do this. It's a unique quality, that is, okay? And just the 2 of us played on stage that night, right? The critics and newspaper media and all wrote that up as the highlight of the whole festival.
Now, was that issued as a live record on Pablo, or did you subsequently make a record?
No, I don't know if they recorded it or not. They might have recorded it, but they didn't put that out, not as a record, as far as I know. You know, we did go into the studio and do an album, just the 2 of us.
That's what I meant.
Right. No, we did that in the studio. It had nothing to do with the live concert.
But did it come after the live concert? Was it?
Yeah, that came after.
Yeah. you know, among pianists that you use currently, Armani Alexander, who's, I wouldn't say he's just like Peterson, but he's certainly of the same.
Well, he
kind
has a
of
certain
play.
amount of Peterson influence.
Yeah.
However, now even all these people I've mentioned, I never mentioned another gentleman who is my favorite. A lot of people would be shocked by the fact that I place him above all the rest. Okay, that would be Cedar Walton, who's my current pianist when I perform with my own group. Okay, but the reason for that is he has all of the aspects and the qualities that I lack in a pianist in terms of his approach, his concept, and art. You know, I love him, and a lot of people still don't even know who he is. You know, this is what I'm saying also about going back to what we were talking about in terms of exposure. There's so many great musicians who never get enough exposure so that the people, or the world for that matter, would recognize it and know who he is. I feel it's just vitally necessary that people of that caliber or magnitude should be known.
Now this is the, and I'm remiss for not bringing it out earlier, this is the band that you have with Ray Brown and
Cedar Walton and Mickey Roker.
Right.
Right. These are the musicians I chose as my favorites, in other words. These are the musicians who I feel I would enjoy working with most, okay? Because this is the idea. I say, well, eventually I'm going to get around to trying to put a band together with the musicians who I like most or who I enjoy playing with more so than anyone else. And these are some of the musicians. Now, there are others, but I'm talking about just within the confines of this quartet. Those are my favorites.
One of the more interesting anecdotes that you shared with me the last couple of days is about your first instrument, which got the name ironing board. You want to tell me how you got it and why it was called an ironing board?
Well, first of all, the set itself was so small. And then when you folded it, it was about the size of an ironing board. This is how it got to be called that, you know, because of the size of it. It was really just a 2.5 octave set that I used. And also, when the pipes underneath, or the resonators, would break, I would use the can from canned biscuits. I'd take the top off and paint it and insert them under there to have resonators,
make resonators
coming from the instrument itself.
That's a far cry from that 2.5 octave ironing board to the kind of instrument you play today. What's your preferred instrument?
Oh, well, I play a pre-war instrument that was made in 1937, and which is like a console model, a big 3-octave set. This is the one I prefer to play most.
Well, let's go over to the vibra harp now and talk a little bit about technique and how you evolved your style on that instrument.
Okay.
And you've been credited with introducing a more lyrical, melodic style and adapting it to the phrasing that came about with bebop. Would you illustrate the difference between the Hampton style and the style that you evolved?
Well, now let me tell you, it's hard to explain that, but maybe I can. First of all, it has to do with me on the instrument. A discovery which I made once I started playing the instrument is an important aspect of this instrument, a speed control, which I use to slow these fans down or speed them up as I need in terms of the instrument and sound. Now, the best way to do that is to demonstrate, first of all. Without those fans, you get just what is just a natural sound of the bar itself, okay? Now, once I use the speed control, where these fans go around, by placing them at a certain degree, I can make it sound different like this. Then I can slow it up, or speed it up, or slow it down as I need, okay?
Well, speed it up for us. Let's see how that sounds.
Oh, my goodness. Very mechanical.
Now slow it down for us.
See, so it's easy really to demonstrate as opposed to try and verbally explain these aspects of the instrument.
Now show us where you like it.
Well, that's the way I like it. See, you can hear the vibrato coming from the instrument, right? Okay, the vibrato in turn creates the sound that you get. Now, I have to mention this because that vibrato comes from the fact that I started my professional career as a singer, not as a player, by the way, okay? Yeah. And this is the type of vibrato that I use in singing, which I later adopted to this instrument once I discovered I could do that with this instrument.
So, if you were to say your principal influences were not percussionists per se, although this is a percussion instrument, right, but were instruments that had a singing quality to them.
Well, yeah, because all of my previous instruments, except for the drums, were all pitch instruments, which you know, give off lyrical and melodic sounds. Yeah. And I've always been geared to lyrical and melodic music throughout my whole career. I'm talking about even before I became a professional.
So you found in the vibes an instrument that allowed you to express yourselves rhythmically, which is a very important thing to you.
Rhythmically and lyrically, right, right. This is what I was able to do in playing this instrument, combine those two concepts of music. And the challenge also was with me to try and make this instrument sound as a horn would in playing what we now call modern jazz or bebop music.
Give us a horn line as opposed to a strictly percussive line.
Okay. See, by rolling those notes, as we say, or those are what we call grace notes, I can make it sound different from just a plain sounding instrument like that, and make it sound like, you know, which gives it a different kind of a context, you know, in the terms of playing. Otherwise, instead of playing just one single line, one straight note like that, I can make it sound like that. And it even sounds different in the course of playing phrases or melodies.
Is that a matter of mallet technique?
Right.
And right. What was how did that come about, your mallet technique? Just experimentation?
Well, the mallet technique I found also in my playing, I developed what is known as the two mallet technique. Because you can, as you know, you can use 3 or 4, but for the type of music that we were playing at that time, I found it was more feasible and conducive for me to play with 2 mallets as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5. You know, because a lot of the music, it went by too fast for you to try to adapt by playing with, unless you adopt that style. Now you can adapt that style and play it with, say, 3 mallets or 4 mallets in your hand, but you won't be able to get the dynamics, which is, was basically used in jazz music to do that kind of playing. And therefore I found the 2 mallet technique is better for me. Well, plus in the course of playing, I can use the 2 mallets as fast as any other player can use with 3 or 4.
And plus that would tend to set the instrument more in a rhythmic function because you would be tending to play almost chords if you were using the multi-mallet thing instead of a single line
And so
approach.
the 2 mallet technique enables you to make it more lyrical as opposed to using 3, 4 mallets or 4 or more. That is, you know, the way I look at it.
Now, there are some, I guess, pieces that have historically been associated with you. At the Modern Jazz Quartet would be Django, and also Bag's Groove, I guess, is sort of your signature piece.
Right.
Would you care to give us a taste of Django and then a bit of Bag's Groove?
Okay, Django is a piece that with the quartet, John has become known for as the composer. You know, and I said that to say you take a piece with jazz that the composer writes, and there are many musicians who love the piece so much that they want to perform it, okay? This is how you get many recorded versions of a song, and eventually it becomes what you call a jazz classic. You know, that tunes like Monk's Around Midnight, you know. I can't think of any jazz musician that I know of who hasn't at one time or another played that piece. You know, that's another echelon or another criteria.
Well, you told me that if there was one piece of music that you could take with you to some other planet, or if you were told you could only play one piece of music, it would be Round About Midnight.
Well, yeah. If I couldn't take but one, I don't know. I imagine I would have to choose it. That is one of my favorites, without question.
What about that? What about that piece makes it so special to you?
Okay, I have to explain in musical terms, so the average person who doesn't understand music wouldn't understand this answer. It has to do with what we call musically in jazz a minor mode. A minor mode which has more feeling, geared for more feeling which comes from the heart, as opposed to a major sound, of the instrument. Okay, being a completely minor type piece in its conception. I think this is what made me lean toward that piece in terms of a favorite.
Can we hear a bit of it? I mean, it gave us a snatch, but...
That's not the whole piece, but that's just a part of it to give you an idea of what it, of what I mean.
I think you told
it's that
me...
minor conception that I lean toward in music.
You are well known as a ballads player.
That also comes from my singing. That influence never left, of course, and being a major part of my musical career, I lean toward lyricism. You know, I lean toward melodic and lyrical things as opposed to any other kind of music.
Is there a favorite in that repertoire you'd like to could give us a taste of?
No, well, there's other pieces like John Lewis's Django, which everybody knows.
Okay, I'll leave you alone if you will play a bit of Bag's Groove.
Oh, okay, all right. It's just a simple blues melody.
It seems like any piece you play, you're able to imbue with the feeling of the blues and bring a certain deep soulfulness to it. What in your background is the basis of that?
Oh, that's easy. That comes from a very basic religious background, which I have. I had a very strict religious upbringing, and the influence of the music itself carries over into whatever style of music that I would play, because the roots of that music and that style is stronger than any other in terms of my direction as far as playing and concept musically.
Okay, we got 1 minute.
Oh, really?
As they say in TV,
half a minute.
take us out.
Oh, okay.